The mic. Other. Did told me. Yeah. Otherwise.
Switch it off, you mean?
So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to the session on social capital, addressing the role and concerns of citizens and consumers. My name is Peter Schindelmeister, and I'm working for the Austrian Ministry of Science, Research and Economy, where I'm responsible for the life sciences. And I'm also working quite a lot with international organizations like the European Union or the OECD. And we have with us here three very distinguished guests. To my left, Professor Lynn Frower and Professor George Crusos. To my right, Signora Carlo Petrini. I will introduce them a little bit later. We will hold the session in exact the sequence as it's described here. And just to have some introducing words, most of you heard in the morning the speech of Commissioner Geoghegan-Quinn, who told us we in Europe take food security for granted, and still we are 3 meals away from social breakdown. And I don't know who of you have seen the most recent Eurobarometer, which deals with science and technology, and this supports here the social perception which Europeans have towards science and technology, and whereas the health topics are regarded as the most important, food and food security and food quality are only quite in the middle of the chain. And also, this Eurobarometer only came out a couple of days ago, And it stresses also that throughout Europe, the perception is quite differently. The most optimistic countries are the Nordic countries and the UK, also the Netherlands. The least optimistic countries are Germany, Austria, Italy, Greece. So we have here quite a mixture with one optimistic and three pessimistic countries. And the question is, how is bioeconomy on the various levels perceived by the general public, and can we influence the public, and how can the social capital, how can the involvement of the general public contribute to the progress of society via the bioeconomy? And I would like to introduce now Lynn Frewer, who is Chair of Food and Society at Newcastle University. Lynn Frewer has academic interests in all of the areas of food and society, and has been at Wageningen University before, and at the Institute of Food Research in Reading. And she has extensive involvement in EU and nationally funded projects, primarily in the area of social science and the agri-food sector. So Lynn, the floor is yours now.
Well, first of all, thank you very much to the organisers for asking me to come and talk to you today. I was asked to talk about risk perception and how consumers respond to different areas of the bioeconomy. My talk will focus on the agri-food sector, and although it will be underpinned by discussion of food security, I will also present two case studies, one of which emphasizes pessimism and one of which emphasizes optimism. So, as I'm sure everyone is familiar with the definition of food security provided by FAO in 1996. So, although sometimes food security is interpreted simply as availability, we also need to address physical and economic access to sufficient and safe, nutritious food for dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. So a very wide and all-embracing definition. At the moment, as we're seeing, food security is being compromised globally, not least because of geopolitical shifts, increases in demand for animal proteins, for example, and also problems with supply, climate change, and so forth. I would argue that the challenge of food insecurity can only be addressed through multidisciplinary or transdisciplinary research, where we really knock natural and social science activities together to focus on the problem under consideration. And we cannot, as we have done in the past, address food safety, adequate nutrition, and sustainable production separately. They need to be addressed together and often in the same research project. This might, for example, involve collaboration between different European JPIs, FATI and, for example, the JPI, A Healthy Diet for a Healthy Life. Let's just think about food safety. From the images I've selected, we can see that there are a huge range of issues, from radioactive contamination, dioxin contamination, to aflatoxins, microbes, or even animals infiltrating our food chain. The way experts and consumers perceive risk is now well established to differ. And to summarize, experts traditionally have relied on technical risk assessments, used scientific argumentation, which does not take account of potential socio-economic impacts of change, the unintended effects of science and technology policy. Experts, in theory, balance risk against benefits, but in the past, in governance and policy, it's not always clear how socio-economic benefits or even technical benefits are assessed. We're looking at technical assessment of risk, health risk, sometimes environmental risk, but these other potential metrics are not taken into account. Against this, the public use their risk-benefit perceptions to make judgments about technological innovation, about risk, about benefit. They need risk-benefit communication to take account of their concerns, as well as technical risk estimates, and also utilize emotional or affective responses. Sometimes people cannot think about every event in their environment in an in-depth cognitive way. They need to use emotional responses as a cue to help them decide what to do, what to accept, what to reject. Let's move on to technology adoption. How does risk perception influence societal acceptance of novel and emerging technologies which may improve food security? I'm going to start with GM, some images drawn from the internet, some frightening, some futuristic, some exciting, and some useful. How do people make decisions when there is so much information available and different messages also provided from different actors about the benefits or otherwise of GM technology? This is what happened in 1998 when unsegregated and untraceable soya was forcibly introduced into Europe. No choice over consumption, a lot of anger. Much of that anger also was expressed through this kind of media imagery. Thinking about novel applications of GM animals and improved security in the food area, some are acceptable, some less so. The Aqua Bounty salmon still hasn't been approved in the US. It's a GM salmon, as you know, which can grow twice as fast, but which perhaps has not aligned with even the preferences of American consumers. The goat that produces spider silk in its milk, it's used for fabrics. The spider silk can be harvested to build bulletproof vests and space cable. The public are worried about the products of this animal getting into the human food chain through fraud or perhaps by accident, the milk or the meat. I'm just going to summarize the results of a meta-analysis where all of the data over the entire world were put together regarding consumer attitudes to GM foods and then synthesized into one big study. What this showed was that plant-related applications were more acceptable than animal-related applications. However, there was little concern about the use of either plants or animals in the pharmaceutical sector. Food applications were the focus of consumer negativity. But risk perceptions associated with plants and animals were greater in Europe than North America and Asia. Benefit perceptions were greater in North America and Asia compared to Europe, but the Americans and the Asians were more concerned about moral issues. So what's driving acceptability? Is it moral concern? Is it risk perception? Or is it benefit perception? Because everywhere in the world, benefit perception has been increasing. And if we make decisions based on benefit, then we might expect that some of these new controversial technologies which have been rejected in the past might become more acceptable. And clearly, that's also going to depend on the sector in which they're going to be applied. Let's move on. Another area, nutrigenomics, personalized nutrition. At a time when food security is problematic, perhaps it's best to align diet with the needs of consumers in terms of their personal genetics to make sure that they eat the healthiest foods possible. And this might also be true at a time at an aging population where perhaps this sort of diet can offset some of the problems that are associated with an aging population. So nutrigenomics and individualized dietary advice. Will consumers accept personalized nutrition given that they have to, under many circumstances, donate their DNA to a small company who's delivering this personalized advice? DNA testing, food profiling, personal ICT-based coaching across the internet to help people to eat specific foods, also the development of specific food products for people with particular genes. Is this something that people want? Here's the results of a survey in 9 different European countries. I've listed them there. 9,500 participants. And this is the result. I'm not going to go through this in depth, except to say that the most important factor determining whether people will adopt this particular innovation is the extent to which they perceive there is a benefit to them personally. So no benefit, no adoption. So in this case, risk is less important, but the extent to which somebody sees that the technology will benefit them influences whether they will adopt it. And I'm beginning to test this kind of model. My colleagues are testing this model in other innovations across the bioeconomy sector. And for many innovations, it is this factor of perceived benefit which is driving adoption. The other issue is whether people can actually, if you like, take up a particular innovation. In agri-food, this is probably more important than some other applications, for example, in the energy sector. People go shopping, they have families to look after. Can they act in such a way to take up a particular innovation, or is it too difficult? Is it too expensive? Are those people on lower incomes actually excluded from some of these innovations which are being developed in the agri-food sector? So I'll finish now. Some of the things that we're beginning to consider in the area of risk-benefit perception. Insect proteins. This is a big startup in Europe as well as other parts of the world. Are insect proteins acceptable to the public? The benefits in terms of sustainability going to outweigh the perceived risk and also the effective response, the yuck factor. I've just got back from a trip to Beijing and I have some photos of a scorpion on a stick being sold in the street market. And for me, that's a food product too far. But clearly, locally, that's perfectly acceptable. In terms of urban, peri-urban agriculture, We heard about the kind of migration from the countryside to the city. Are these new innovations where we develop vertical farms in the city acceptable? Is this just plants or algae, or can we also engage in animal production in this kind of environment? Do we need to locate these at sea where people can't see them, but where we pay a cost in terms of energy? And what about rethinking our landscape? Will deserts bloom through atomic power? Or again, is the introduction of atomic power not acceptable in this context? So I'll finish there with some summary. Many technological approaches to improving food security are being developed. The question is, are they all acceptable to consumers in different parts of the world? There are cultural differences in consumer demand. However, demand is important. We can't just focus on technological supply. We also need, as a European area, to consider our export markets. And of course, that brings in the conversation about regulatory harmonization and if we require this at a global level. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Lynn. I think your presentation will give us food for discussion later on. And staying on the topic of food and your Chinese example of a scorpion on a stick and the Chinese custom of, let's say, to exploit their animals on the table to a much greater extent that we are used to in Europe, leads to our next speaker, Carlo Petrini, president and founder of the Slow Food Movement. Carlo Petrini is a native of Bra, Italy, and in 1933 he was instrumental in creating and developing the Italian Food and Wine Association, Arcigola. And finally, in 1986, he founded the Slow Food Movement as a reaction or as a response to the opening of the first McDonald's at the Piazza di Spagna in Roma. Carlo Petrini has a background in sociology and for the creation of the Slow Food Movement, which nowadays spans quite over the world and has more than 80,000 members and supporters. He was awarded with a lot of academic and other honors. He holds honorary degrees inter alia from the in cultural anthropology from the Istituto Universitario of Suor Orsola Benincasa of Naples, from the University of New Hampshire and of Palermo. And Carlo Petrini is regarded as a visionary when it comes to how we should treat our food in the 21st century. Carlo, the floor is yours, please.
Innanzitutto chiedo scusa se non parlo inglese. Io non so come è stato fatto questa ricerca per cui alcuni paesi sono pessimisti, altri sono ottimisti rispetto all'uso della bioeconomia e delle nuove tecnologie. E neanche ho analisi dettagliate su quelle che sono le sensibilità, i sentimenti dei cittadini consumatori rispetto a quelle che sono le novità che nel mondo alimentare noi tutti viviamo quotidianamente.
Now, first of all, apologies for not speaking in English, but I will be translating for the foreign guests. Now, I don't know where the data came or how the research was carried out to determine that some European countries are more optimistic and some European countries are more pessimistic when it comes to the acceptance of biotechnology and bioeconomy and new technologies. And I myself don't really have any detailed data or analyses on the feelings and the perception of consumers and customers when it comes to accepting what is new in the food sector.
Quindi porterò l'esperienza di un movimento come il nostro che è presente in 170 paesi del mondo e che lavora con comunità agricole, di pescatori, di trasformatori, di nomadi, di pastori e di cittadini che hanno a cuore la qualità alimentare e la difesa della biodiversità.
So I will tell you about our experience as a global movement, which is now present in 170 countries in the world. We work with communities made of farmers, fishermen, processors, nomadic people, shepherds, and citizens, consumers who really have at heart the quality of our food and the safeguard of biodiversity.
E innanzitutto vorrei dire che spesso si ha una concezione della scienza che è distaccata dalle persone comuni, per cui la scienza depositaria della verità e gli altri si misurano in base alle emozioni che essi hanno, come se fossero delle bestiole da vedere come reagiscono. Non è così. Non è assolutamente così, anzi, molte volte la scienza sta nelle pratiche tradizionali che l'umanità anno per anno ha costruito, secolo per secolo, e che in base all'empiria sono diventate scienza anch'essi. Quindi non avrei questa visione da un lato il mondo scientifico e dagli altri i consumatori, i cittadini, da misurare come se fossero delle bestiole.
Let me begin by saying that often we have an idea of science as if it was something that is completely removed from the daily lives of common people. So we have this idea that science is the truth, science holds the truth, and we as people are just there as little animals to observe and see how we feel and how we react to what happens inside. But that is not the case, not at all, quite the opposite. Very often science lies in practices that have been developed over the years, over the centuries, and which empirically, with an empiric approach, have turned into science. So I wouldn't really say that there is this juxtaposition between science on the one hand and we, the consumers, who are just to be observed in the way we react and you know, as if we were little guinea pigs.
Nella nostra storia di movimento abbiamo potuto constatare che molte volte pratiche ancestrali riproposte con tecnologie moderne sono estremamente valide, sono estremamente moderne. C'è molta più scientificità e sostenibilità in tante pratiche antiche che non nei laboratori, solo nei laboratori scientifici.
In our history as a movement, we have seen many times that ancestral, very old practices, when replicated with the modern technologies, are extremely modern, they are extremely scientific. So we have really seen that these old and ancient practices are much more scientific and much more sustainable as well than what happens sometimes in scientific laboratories.
Per esempio, la nuova pratica dell'agroecologia parte proprio da questo assunto. Si studia l'agricoltura e la connessione che essa ha con l'ecologia, partendo dalle pratiche e dal modo di produrre di milioni di contadini che in ogni angolo del mondo praticano biotecnologie addirittura di tipo ancestrale. Si parte di lì per capire la complessità dell'argomento.
For instance, the modern concept of agroecology starts exactly from there. It is the studying of methods of farming which bring together farming and ecology. But the study of agroecology really starts from the practices, from the production methods of millions and millions of farmers who all over the world really implement biotechnologies through their ancient practices. And that's the starting point.
Questo approccio è molto importante e noi lo constatiamo giorno dopo giorno rispetto alla capacità e alla sensibilità che molte persone hanno storicamente nel realizzare pratiche alimentari sostenibili.
And we see the importance of this approach every single day, especially in the ability and the sensitivity of many people who have developed over the years sustainable farming practices.
Tuttavia non sarei onesto se non vi dicessi che da più parti e in maniera sempre più incisiva sta crescendo da parte di molte persone nel mondo la consapevolezza che questo sistema alimentare non funziona.
However, I wouldn't be honest if I didn't tell you that in many parts of the world and in many people, the awareness is growing that the current food system can no longer work.
Aver privilegiato per troppo tempo la produzione quantitativa e aver portato il cibo a diventare una merce, una commodity, facendogli perdere il suo valore, è stato un disastro nel campo alimentare.
Having favored and promoted for far too long a merely quantitative approach, where food has been turned into a mere commodity and has lost all its value, was a real disaster.
Produrre, quantità, quasi come se la nostra terra madre avesse risorse infinite. Oggi la gente incomincia a capire la finitezza delle risorse. Le risorse non sono infinite, c'è una finitezza.
We've kept on producing, focusing on quantities and higher quantities as if the resources of Mother Earth were endless and infinite. Now people are becoming aware that there are finite resources, they're not going to last forever, and therefore the current system can no longer work.
Per realizzare questo sistema alimentare mancherà l'acqua. Tra poco tempo sarà il vero problema mondiale, la carenza d'acqua, e noi spendiamo l'80% dell'acqua per l'agricoltura.
This is just one of the reasons why this system will no longer be sustainable is the lack of water. We're running out of water very, very soon, and let's remember that 80% of the world water is used for farming.
In ogni angolo del pianeta stiamo perdendo fertilità del suolo. Perdiamo la fertilità. Se voi avete opportunità di parlare con qualche vecchio contadino dei vostri territori e chiedere com'era la fertilità dei suoli 50-60 anni fa, in ogni angolo del pianeta vi diranno che era più fertile il suolo.
We're losing everywhere, in every corner of the world, we're losing the fertility of the soil. If you have the chance of talking to an old farmer, someone in your family, and ask what was the fertility of the soil like 50, 60 years ago, everywhere in the world they will tell you that it's really going lost.
Eppure bisogna sempre produrre di più, non è sufficiente. E nello stesso tempo conviviamo con il più grande spreco alimentare della storia dell'umanità.
But however, we still keep on producing. We want more and more products. At the same time, though, we are living with the greatest food waste in the history of mankind.
Produciamo cibo per 12 miliardi di viventi in questo momento.
Right now, we are producing enough food for 12 billion people.
Siamo 7 miliardi e 300 milioni sulla Terra.
We're only 7.3 on the Earth.
1 miliardo è malnutrito e soffre di fame.
1 billion suffers from malnutrition and hunger.
Questo vuol dire che il 40% della produzione alimentare viene buttata via.
That means that 40% of the entire food production is wasted.
Questo i cittadini cominciano a sentirlo, incominciano a capirlo e partono le buone pratiche.
Citizens are beginning to understand this and good practices are beginning to be developed.
Partono le buone pratiche di realizzare orti nelle scuole, partono le buone pratiche di sprecare di meno, di accorciare la filiera.
Good practices are beginning to develop, such as school gardens, or wasting less, or working with a shorter production and supply chain.
Partono le buone pratiche di privilegiare il consumo locale e non le derrate che attraversano i continenti.
Local production is beginning to be preferred and favored rather than having food coming from miles and miles away.
È un processo lento che ancora non coinvolge la maggioranza, ma è un processo che sta crescendo. E la politica dovrebbe interessare, dovrebbe avere voce in capitolo.
It's a slow process and it's going to take some time still, but it's growing. It doesn't involve the majority yet, but it's growing. And politicians really should have a say in all this.
Dovrebbe rafforzare i mercati contadini invece che la grande distribuzione.
They should promote and strengthen farmers' markets rather than big supermarkets.
Dovrebbe implementare l'educazione alimentare invece che nella scuola europea non abbiamo l'educazione alimentare.
They should implement food education programs in schools while we don't have any of these programs in Europe.
Dovrebbe difendere i piccoli contadini che presiedono i territori invece di difendere l'agricoltura intensiva.
They should defend small-scale farmers and producers who defend and protect our local territories rather than promote industrial farming.
E non difendendo i piccoli contadini, anche il nostro sistema idrogeologico va a essere distrutto.
And by not protecting small-scale farmers, even our water and soil systems are being destroyed.
In Italia ogni posto c'è una frana, sta franando il nostro paese perché non ci sono più i contadini che tengono l'agricoltura.
Everywhere in Italy we have landslides. I mean, Italy is literally collapsing because farmers are no longer there to, protect the land.
E ci costa di più sistemare il terreno che frana che non pagare l'agricoltura sana.
It costs us more to fix the landslides and the land that's been destroyed rather than invest in proper farming.
Questo comincia a essere sentito dalla gente. Questo è un'onda che cresce. Dare valore al cibo. Il cibo ha valore, non è un carburante. Dietro a un prodotto c'è una persona che ha lavorato, che ha messo la sua vita, che tiene in piedi un territorio. Questo è il valore. E non solo il prezzo. C'è differenza tra prezzo e valore.
This is growing. People are becoming aware of it. It's a tidal wave that is growing. Food is value, and we have to remember that. And it's not like a fuel. Behind a food product, there is someone who's worked, who's devoted their life to food production, who are protecting a territory, a land. This is what value is. It's not price. Price is a completely different thing than value.
E per fare queste buone pratiche noi non siamo difensori di un mondo antico. Noi siamo estremamente moderni.
When I say that we need these good practices, I'm not defending an old world, quite the opposite. It's a very modern approach.
Noi vogliamo che le nuove tecnologie siano al servizio di questa politica e non della politica solo del profitto.
We want new technologies to be used to be at the service of these practices rather than just at the service of profit.
Noi crediamo che i contadini del futuro siano tecnologicamente in grado di organizzare la loro azienda.
We believe that future farmers will be technologically apt and technologically skilled.
Di evitare lo spreco, di usare nuove energie, di avere nuova visione anche nella distribuzione del cibo.
We believe that thanks to new technologies, farmers will be able to reduce waste, to use new sources of energy, to find new ways to distribute their products.
Guai a non sentire queste cose. Guai a far finta che queste cose non esistono, perché queste cose sono già patrimonio comune di molta gente in ogni angolo del pianeta.
we can't pretend that these things do not exist, and we can't just pretend that they're not there. It's common heritage, it's shared asset of many, many people around the world.
E io sono convinto che tra poco anche la politica prenderà atto di questo.
And I'm confident that very soon politicians will become aware of this as well.
E che la scienza prenderà per mano i saperi tradizionali e altrettanto i saperi tradizionali prenderanno per mano la scienza.
And I'm sure that very soon science will go hand in hand with traditional knowledge, and that traditional knowledge will accept science as well.
Perché fino a quando la scienza si colloca qui e i saperi tradizionali qui, non c'è dialogo.
If we keep on thinking that science is up here and traditional knowledge is down there won't be a dialogue.
Il dialogo si fa tra pari.
You have a dialogue between peers.
Un contadino, un pastore è anche lui scienziato.
A farmer, a shepherd is also a scientist.
E ha molto da insegnare anche agli scienziati e molto da imparare dagli scienziati.
They have a lot to teach to scientists, and they have a lot to learn from scientists.
E viceversa lo scienziato ha molto da ascoltare e molto da insegnare.
And the other way around, scientists have a lot to listen to and a lot to teach
Il
as well.
dialogo tra pari è l'unica risposta che noi possiamo favorire.
But peer dialogue is the only answer I believe that we can give.
Many thanks for this really convincing and really electrifying speech and manifest for a dialogue on eye level, dialogue on face-to-face, and for reminding us that science has not to act detached from the practical views and detached from the practical facts of life, but in conjunction with them. And this also leads us to our next speaker. Also, the field is quite a different one. Professor George Chrysos from Greece. He's professor and chairman of the Department of Pediatrics at the Athens University Medical School. He still holds a professorship at Georgetown University, and he holds also the UNESCO chair on adolescent health care. He is an endocrinologist, and he is among the 250 most prominent clinical investigators in the world, with more than 1,100 scientific publications, 29 books, and his work has been cited over 67,000 times, as I found in his CV. And I won't begin mentioning his various academic honorships, because then we would still here be tomorrow, and he will talk to us about the development of a biotechnology cluster in Greece and where there might be a role for creating new and enabling conditions for the bioeconomy. And I'll give the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I also thank the organizing committee for the invitation. Indeed, in Greece in the past 3 or 4 years, we've been trying to develop a biotechnology cluster in the area of Athens with a role for creating new enabling conditions for the bioeconomy. Why a biotechnology cluster? First of all, innovative biotechnology research initiatives focus on multifaceted modes of collaboration between academic or research institutions and private industry stakeholders. Second, cluster members benefit the most from cross-communication between diverse biomedical, agricultural, and industrial research teams in academic institutions. Finally, biotechnology clusters actively enhance local and regional economies through the creation of new job opportunities, implementation of innovative activities, and development of unique, market-driven smart specialization technologies. Now, the Bioionian cluster, it's Bio and Ionia, the old name for Greece, consists of 27 leading national and international businesses, universities, biomedical research institutes, and academic hospitals. It is based on 4 pillars, namely clinical investigation, environmental health sciences, education, and technology transfer. It aims at facilitation of biotechnology and health sciences development in Greece, Southeast Europe, Middle East, and Northern Africa. The Bionian cluster came out first in the evaluation of proposals from the European Union Committee with a score of 92%. Now, the mission is establishment of a value chain formed by clinical investigators, pharma companies, and ICT health experts. Development of innovative health sciences and market-driven smart specialization solutions. Aggressive networking to optimize coordination of multidisciplinary innovation efforts will prime cooperation between leading Greek research institutions, biomedical researchers, and the Greek diaspora and private enterprises. We will provide the following dissemination services: promotion of research findings to the public via open seminars, promotional activities for the further education of the general public regarding international science, and finally, consumer services for strategy development via the strong network of Bionian cluster. Now, the vision of the Bionian cluster is to bring Greece to the forefront of both red and green biotechnology. And Greece has an excellent professional potential with many biomedical scientists, both in the country and outside. So it's a combined effort. Initially, the cluster is focusing on applied preclinical and clinical research, including clinical pharmacology and therapeutics, via the Institute of Clinical Investigation. It will also concentrate on the reduction of the burden of chronic human disease and disability through a better understanding of the impact of environmental factors on health. And here I have my own pet project. Stakeholders are the patients and solely at large, i.e. the customers and consumers of these new products. The performance of preclinical and clinical studies correspond to the establishment of demonstration and pilot plans, for example, in the area of biorefining. So here is the Bionian cluster structure and its interactions. On one side, we have the clinical investigation and the biosciences. On the other, the environmental health sciences. Thus, we will perform basic and preclinical research, translational and clinical research, and then also environmental research and health outcomes. We have developed an excellent clinical trial center for clinical trials, diagnostics, and healthcare. And we are in the process of developing a testing and certification bioelectronic and quality assurance program. So the goal of the Bionian cluster is to contribute substantially to regional economic development by overcoming the divide between academic research hubs and related stakeholders of the private industry. To foster translational research, creating a more solid bridge between discovery, clinic, and market, or replacing the picture on the top with a picture in the bottom. I want to remind people who work in this area or who don't know much about this area that in the development of new products, from the R&D, in other words, to the market is a long distance. And this passage has been called the Valley of Death. And the reason for that is because you can start with probably 1,000 leads and end up with 1 or 2. Now, the Bionian cluster's 4 main pillars are clinical investigation, as I said, environmental health sciences, then education, with seminars for researchers and scientists and professionals, with master degrees in biotechnology, we're all set for that, with certified academic training and smart specialization, and also the cluster has a modern transfer technology office for applied research, innovation and technology, patents, seeking of European funds, and participating in the Horizon 2014-2020. A few words about the clinical part of the cluster, the Institute of Clinical Investigation, or ICI. This envisions to evolve to a world-class applied research institute. As you know, clinical research organizations, or CROs, are playing increasingly important roles in drug development worldwide, granted that their activities cover the entire range of lead compound development, from phase 1 trials to post-marketing studies. Thus, embedding, disseminating, and constantly promoting scientific appreciation, public awareness, and biomedical community understanding of the fundamental principles, applied methodologies, concepts, and outcomes of all aspects in the field of clinical investigation. Also, the plan is to encompass a wide spectrum of cutting-edge research that could be of benefit to the understanding of human disease and the best possible ways to treat it. It would focus on applied clinical research, clinical pharmacology, and therapeutics. The ICI was modeled after the general clinical centers of the USA and Europe. It has been successfully audited by the Austrian audit firm Sofida for the ICI GCPs and has received ISO 9001 authentication for conducting clinical trials, and is in the process already of conducting 3 such large trials. Now, there are many market opportunities for CROs, and according to Business Insights, the CROs market has been growing on the base of a compound annual growth rate of more than 12% during the 2010 decade, and that's in the figure in the bottom of the slide. Now, according to Calorama Information Reports, the portion of global drug development research, clinical trials, outsourced to CROs reached 36 billion in 2011, up 6.6 annually from 31.8 billion in 2009. And this market is projected to grow to 60 billion by 2016. Now, my own pet project, stress. One of our plans is to establish a stress institute, which will be an interdisciplinary center of excellence for the study of stress and health promotion. Focusing on the society at large, the Biennial Cluster plans to establish this institute. And why this institute? Because nowadays humans are exposed mainly to chronic social stress, work stress, economic stress, etc., leading to disturbances of homeostasis, ultimately causing mental and physical disease. We believe now that over 50% of the human pathology, the so-called chronic non-communicable disorders, which are so common after the age of 50 in modern humanity, are caused by this chronic, mild stress, which is the stress that this life exposes us to. Stress is defined as a disturbance of the dynamic balance or homeostasis of a complex system, such as the human organism or society. Stressor as the force that produces the disturbance, and adaptive response as the force from within the complex system that strives to return homeostasis to normal. In the case of the human organism, the adaptive response is observed by a specialized system in our brain and body, the stress system, which is activated to help us deal with stress when a stressor of any kind exceeds a certain threshold. However, this very same system, through its hormonal mediators, is causing human disease. And actually, I would say the majority of contemporary human disease. The public are our customers. They correspond to the consumers of new bio-based products along various bio-based value chains in the field of industrial biotechnology. So here is the Stress Institute's ideal structure. On one side, we have the Center for Clinical and Epidemiologic Studies. On the other, the Center for basic, preclinical, and translational studies. So that will be incorporated to the rest of the cluster structure. And then also we have the Center for Stress Education, including a graduate school that will award master's and PhD degrees, which already the University of Athens does provide. School for the public, school for helping local organizations, such as providing courses on diminishing work stress and improving efficiency, or courses to health professionals on establishing principled compassion without the damaging effects of pathologic empathy on the caregiver and the cared together. So the expected outcome from a STENS Institute will provide scientific benefits and societal and economic benefits. There will be creation of synergism with other scientific areas, development and extension of technological platforms, improvement of innovation, and involvement of stakeholders. On the other hand, we're going to have better health services for the population, revenues for the Institute, financial self-sustainability, boost to the local economy, and attraction of new investors. I'd like to say that the entire area of Southeast Europe, as well as the Middle East, with the exception of Israel and North Africa, is devoid of such a biotechnology cluster. So one of our ambitions is to serve as a center for the entire area. Also, we have Greek scientists of the diaspora throughout the world, especially United States and Western and Central Europe, many of whom are willing to either come back or help as much as they can from where they are. And I'll finish with saying that a cluster will succeed by synergy among its members. Synergy means that the total is more than the sum of the two. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And especially the last sentence you told us, the whole is more than the sum of its parts, is I think one of the messages we can also build upon. And we have heard now three very different angles dealing with bioeconomy from real different perspectives, dealing with food and feed perspectives, dealing with perspectives of eating, healthy eating, and not only healthy eating, but also eating, let's say, wise eating. And now the third intervention rather dealt with a different angle of taking in how to build up a cluster for the benefit of society. And here the societal involvement is some sort of common ground. And I would like to ask, in the first round of the discussion, our participants here, how they perceive the role of the public, how they perceive the role of the so-called ordinary people, and how they could envisage that this involvement of the general public could be mobilized at their own level for the benefit of sustainable progress. And I would like, Professor Cruz already has the lamp on.
Generally, scientists are not very good in promoting their science to the general public, which is bad. It's almost if it's a different planet. What scientists need to do is they need to popularize their subjects, and they need to have the support of the general public in anything they do. That's the only way to do it. The ivory tower doesn't work very well, with very few exceptions, which we need also. But most of the sciences should be public. Thank you.
Okay, destroy the ivory tower. Lynn, what's your perception of that?
Yeah, I kind of think that's a little bit top down. I mean, there's an enormous issue here of getting the public engaged with science and technology strategy and finding out from them what they see as the kind of products, technologies that they would appreciate and like. So, you know, it's not about just getting the public to understand what scientific endeavor is achieving. It's about getting them designed, involved with the design and implementation strategy, the kind of scientific policies, and the way science is used within society that I think is very important. May I just ask something as well? I was very interested in your presentation about the Stress Institute. Just to be devil's advocate, perhaps another way of dealing with this is to remove the stress in the first place?
Well, you're right. There are two ways to do it. One is to remove the stressor, and the other is to cope with the stressor. Obviously, it's best to remove the stressor, but if you can't do that, then you have to learn to cope.
May I just add, perhaps slow food is a de-stressor?
Ecco, io penso che nei fatti noi assistiamo già a una presa di coscienza da parte di molti strati del pubblico. Io vorrei citare una frase di un grande umanista europeo che si chiama Edgar Morin.
Well, I think that the public has already become aware of many things, and I would like to quote from a great European humanist, Edgar Morin.
Edgar Morin dice: ha raggiunto la veneranda età di 92 anni e dice: se guardo attorno questo mondo e vedo in che stato è la politica, in che stato è l'ambiente, in che stato è l'economia, potrei dire sto per lasciare questo mondo e lo lascio nel disastro totale.
Edgar Morin is 92, and he said, well, if I took a look around me and if I looked at the world, at the state of politics, the state of the environment, the state of the economy, I could say, well, I'm living a world that is a total disaster, I'm leaving behind me total chaos.
Eppure io invece sono, dice Morin, sono ottimista, sono molto ottimista, perché in ogni angolo del mondo ci sono realtà che praticano e vivono economie virtuose, atteggiamenti virtuosi.
But he says, I'm an optimist. I'm very optimistic about the future because if I look around me in every corner of the world, there are people who live and practice virtuous economies and virtuous practices.
Movimenti, associazioni, piccole realtà comunitarie, angoli di scienza responsabile. Sono molti, come un grande fiume che corre sottoterra. E questo fiume, quando uscirà, irrigherà anche la politica, che invece non lo ha ancora capito che questo movimento esiste.
He sees many movements, associations, small communities, and also responsible science as well. And this is like a huge underground river that is already flowing. And one day it will come to the surface and it will flood politics as well, which hasn't realized yet that this movement already exists.
In ogni angolo del mondo ci sono queste realtà. E Morin dice, tutto deve ricominciare e tutto è già ricominciato.
And Morin says that it's everywhere, it's in all corners of the world. And then he adds, everything has to start over again, and everything has already started.
E io sono convinto che tutto è già ricominciato. Basta intercettarlo, basta capirlo. Non è gente potente, non è gente altolocata, molte volte sono gente normale che fa già pratiche virtuose nell'educazione, nel volontariato, nell'amore che ha per la terra, nel senso di fraternità, nel costruire delle cose nuove e anche nel capire che queste cose nuove debbono utilizzare le tecnologie moderne e dialogare con le tecnologie moderne.
So I do believe as well that everything has already started all over again, and it's not powerful people who are doing this. It's most often just ordinary people who work hard in education as volunteers. You know, they work with the love they have for the earth, in the brotherhood feeling that they have, the fraternity that they share with other people, and in building new things, also understanding that they will need new technologies to build these new things.
2 mesi fa mi è capitata una cosa strana. Sono stato contattato da un signore che io personalmente non conoscevo la sua azienda, che è il grande capo di Google, che si chiama Eric Smith.
2 months ago, a very odd thing happened to me. I was contacted by a guy. I didn't know him personally, but I knew his company very well, which is Google, and his name is Eric Smith.
Io non conoscevo Eric Smith. Eric Smith conosceva Slow Food e conosceva la rete di Terra Madre. E dice, vuol fare un dialogo con me a Roma? E ho detto, sì, su che argomento? E lui dice, sulla felicità.
So I didn't know who he was, but he did know who Slow Food was, and he did know the network of Terra Madre. So he called me up one day and said, well, why don't we meet in Rome? And I said, yes, fine, but what are we going to talk about? And he said, happiness.
Contro lo stress.
That's against stress, right?
Io ho detto 2 cose due errori che potevamo fare io per la mia parte e lui per la sua parte.
There were 2 mistakes that I thought we could have run the risk of making. One on my part and he on his part.
Tu, Eric Smith, rappresenti la rete virtuale che ha cambiato il mondo.
You, Eric Smith, represent the virtual network which has transformed the world.
Io rappresento una piccola rete fisica che è Terra Madre con almeno 500.000 di contadini nel mondo.
I represent a small physical network, the network of Terra Madre, which involves about 500,000 farmers all over the world.
L'errore che puoi fare tu, Eric Smith, è di ritenere che la tua rete virtuale sia più importante che la rete fisica.
So the mistake that you, Mr. Eric, could do is to believe that your virtual network is more important than my physical network.
Perché la rete fisica è fatta di carne, ossa, di cuore, di cervello, di pensieri, di sentimenti ed è molto più forte.
Because, you know, a physical network is made of flesh and blood and hearts and brains and thoughts and feelings, so it's much stronger than a virtual network.
Io, Carlo Petrini, posso fare un grande errore. No, come rete fisica, non utilizzare la rete virtuale. Farei un errore enorme.
And me as Carlo Petrini, I could make a huge mistake as well, and which is not using the virtual network for our physical network.
Perché la rete virtuale aiuterà i contadini. Potranno vendere i loro prodotti con la rete virtuale, potranno far conoscere il loro lavoro, potranno educare i consumatori, potranno unirsi tra di loro in ogni parte del mondo e come rete fisica saranno agevolati dalla tecnologia.
because the virtual network will be a very important tool for farmers. It will allow them to sell their products over the virtual network. It will help them disseminate information on their work, educate the consumers, unite and become stronger. So it is very important for them to use and exploit the virtual network to their benefit.
E allora subito ho chiesto di dare un aiuto alla grande iniziativa che noi abbiamo intrapreso di costruire nei prossimi 2 anni 10.000 orti in Africa.
So I immediately asked him to give us a hand in the project that we have for the next 2 years, which is building 10,000 vegetable gardens in Africa.
Contro land grabbing, contro l'accaparramento della terra che grandi multinazionali, Cina, India, Emirati Arabi stanno prendendo la terra agli africani.
Against land grabbing, this phenomenon whereby big multinationals from India, from China, from the Arab Emirates are really stealing and grabbing land away from African people.
È una piccola cosa 10.000 orti, ma è un movimento perché coinvolgerà più di 1 milione di contadini africani.
10,000 gardens is a small thing, but it's a movement and it will involve 1 million African farmers.
E allora tu, Google, mettiti a disposizione per far vedere dove sono quegli orti.
So we've asked Google to give us a hand to show exactly where those gardens are.
E io voglio che gli orti siano georeferenziati.
So I want the gardens to be geo-referenced by Google.
E che se schiaccio quel villaggio mi viene fuori tutte le foto e YouTube dell'orto del villaggio.
So that if you click on a village, you will immediately see all the information, the pictures, the videos on YouTube on that garden and that village.
Delle facce dei giovani, dei contadini che lavorano la terra.
So that you can see the faces of the farmers and the young people who work the earth.
E questo sarà un elemento di comunicazione potentissimo.
This will be an extremely powerful tool for communication.
La tecnologia può aiutare la gente che ha voglia di cambiare il mondo.
So sure, technology can help people who really want to make a change.
E anche se sei in un villaggio sperduto, sconosciuto da Dio, dai santi, nessuno sa dov'è quel villaggio, si può andare a vedere.
So even if you live in a far removed village in the middle of nowhere that nobody knows about, you can still come up on the internet and be seen and visualized.
E questa sera andatelo a vedere anche voi.
So go try, when you go back home, try and take a look at it on Google Maps.
Sono già 2.000.
We already have 2,000 gardens.
Entro 3 anni saranno 10.000.
And there will be 10,000 in 3 years'
E
time.
molto di più.
And even more.
Perché i contadini, i nuovi contadini, i futuri contadini saranno dei grandi, come sempre, intellettuali della terra.
Because
sono i primi intellettuali della terra.
as it always happens, and as they've always been, the new and the future farmers will be the greatest intellectuals of the earth.
Thank you so much for sharing that experience. That is a really intriguing experience how to exploit new technology for the benefit of the sustainable progress. And so that was an anecdote which perfectly fit to my question before. And we still have a couple of minutes for questions from the audience. And if anybody has a question, then please press the right button on your microphone. And afterwards, please do not forget to press the right button again to stop the microphone working. There is a limited number of microphones who can work simultaneously.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
okay, over here. And please do not forget to identify yourself.
Yeah. My name is Susanne Braun. I'm from Hohenheim University in Germany, and currently I'm coordinating an EU-funded project about know-how transfer for traditional food producers. The name of the project is Trafoon, and Slow Food is also a partner in our consortium. And we are currently talking about information material to talk about improvement of know-how transfer between research and small producers. So I would like to invite you to participate in our information material. because I liked your presentation and your arguments that the communication has to be improved, and I think this is already a funded project where we can improve communication.
Yeah, up there, please.
Yes, my name is Roberto Tuberoso, University of Bologna. I'm presently collaborating with you guys because I'm in a proposal for the EU. We are still under the gun, so I don't know. Do you prefer that I speak Italian for respect to Professor Dr. Petrini or whatever? I'll speak in English. I have no philosopher to quote, but I will quote Bill Gates. You've quoted Google. I would like to quote Bill Gates. Bill Gates visited FAO to visit 2 years or 3 years ago. And he's always also an optimist. It's good to be optimist these days because it's very difficult. Someone once said that a pessimist is an optimist who knows how it's going to end up. And I share that view. My point, and I would like to quote what Bill Gates said, he said, they asked him, why are you so optimistic? Well, because we have technology. And technology will help us to solve the problems. Well, clearly, I'm not a technocrat, not at all. My grandfather, we had a small plot, orticello, near Bologna. And I used to till the land with him, and I enjoyed it. But I have a few questions for you, Mr. Petrini. And I can only respectfully, very respectfully disagree with you, with all due respect. I still don't understand how you're going to face the problems that we face in terms of humankind, in terms of food production to ensure food security at the level that we need, because in as much as I agree and I share your view that what you're doing is great, as a scientist, as a citizen, I do not see how you're going to solve the problem, the huge problem that we're facing us in the future. That said, my question for you, very specific question, based upon also what you have repeatedly, you and other people of your movement said in the past about the role of innovation, real innovation, in the release of new improved cultivars. I'm not talking about GMOs. We have thrown away the baby, but now we are throwing away, we have thrown away the dirty water, now we are throwing away the baby. So how do you see the role of plant breeding, for example? Because I know you advocate, let's go back to the exchange of seed between farmers. Fine, that was done 100 years ago, where crops were yielding 4 or 5 times less than now. Let's say that. And when 40% of the people were engaged in agriculture, or 50%, unlike now that there are only 2 or 3%. So how do you reconcile all this? And the role of the release of new varieties and the role of plant breeding, which I see, as it was said in another workshop here before, there is a lack of plant breeders. And have you ever wondered why? Because plant breeding is not sexy. It's not politically correct, although it's technically correct. And we owe a lot to plant breeding, like to many other things, and also to your movement, because it's good to have a critique and the way to interact. Thank you very much.
Sto sempre molto attento a coloro che dicono che sono d'accordo con me, ma. È il ma che mi interessa. Innanzitutto, per chiudere la questione ottimista-pessimista, io so che non è più di moda, ma noi italiani avevamo un grande intellettuale che si chiamava Antonio Gramsci, che ci aveva detto una cosa molto semplice: il pessimismo dell'intelligenza e l'ottimismo della volontà. Io, con tutto rispetto per Bill Gates, preferisco Antonio Gramsci, che di pessimismo, ahimè, ne ha dovuto contare tanto nella sua vita, ma ciò non di meno aveva l'ottimismo del pensare che ci sarebbe stato un riscatto di un'umanità dolente. Bene, Io sono totalmente d'accordo di sperimentare nuove forme di piante, e questo fa parte della storia dell'umanità. Tutta la storia dell'umanità è determinata da quella che è la vera biotecnologia, perché quando quel contadino innestò con una tecnica che lui forse non sapeva neanche che poteva riuscire, una pianta con un'altra, e diede origine a una nuova pianta, faceva biotecnologia, e questa viene dalla notte dei tempi. Noi dobbiamo avere molta attenzione alle biotecnologie e alla genetica pulita. E quando dico genetica pulita, dico una genetica che dovrebbe avere due condizioni. Primo, mettere assieme geni animali con geni vegetali esige molta precauzione. Scusate.
It's fine. Just to close on the optimist, pessimist thing, I know it's not very fashionable in Italy anymore, but we once had a great intellectual named Antonio Gramsci who said once a very simple thing. He said that the pessimism of the intellect is the optimism of the will. And I have to say, I kind of agree with him. And you mentioned Bill Gates, but I still prefer to agree with Mr. Gramsci. He had to face many pessimistic things in his life, but he still had the optimism of saying that somehow would happen at some point to rescue the suffering humanity. Now, coming back to the plant breeding, I actually agree with experimenting with new plants. It's part of our history. It's part of centuries and centuries of history in farming. It's part of the history of mankind. It is the true biotechnology. The farmer who once grafted one plant on another plant without even knowing whether that technique was going to work or not was doing something great. He was, combining plants, and that was the real biotechnology. So I'm absolutely in favor of that. I have nothing against what I call clean genetics. And when I call genetics clean, I mean two things. There have to be two conditions. First of all, when you mix vegetable and plant and animal genes, you have to be very, very careful.
Il diritto alla precauzione è un diritto sacrosanto in questo momento storico. Precauzione. Nello stesso tempo devo dire che l'esigenza di nuove piante, di nuove cultivar, diventerà fondamentale per il cambiamento climatico in molte parti del mondo.
So yeah, when you mix plant and animal genes, you have to take precautions, and the right to precautions is extremely important, especially at this time. There will be a need for new cultivars and new plants in many parts of the world, especially if we think of the climate change that many parts of the world, in fact the whole world, is facing right now.
C'è un secondo aspetto che invece è di ordine economico-sociale, che è anche scienza. Anche l'economia e la sociologia è scienza. Quindi vorrei mettere in evidenza questo secondo aspetto.
There's also a second aspect which has a more social and economic nature. And by the way, sociology and economics are also sciences.
Di chi è la proprietà dei semi? Questa è la domanda. Di chi è la proprietà dei semi?
The question is, who owns the seed? Where does the property of the seeds lie?
Perché questo è l'elemento fondamentale. I semi sono la vita. I semi non sono invenzioni, sono parte della natura. Non possono diventare proprietà privata. Oggi noi abbiamo una situazione che l'80% delle sementi è in mano a 5 multinazionali. Il 20% sono ancora in mano alle comunità. E noi dobbiamo difendere questo 20%, perché il giorno che non c'è più quel 20%, non esisterà più l'agricoltura, esisterà un'altra cosa.
This is the key question. This is really the point, because seeds are life. Seeds are not an invention as such. So they are part of nature. They are life, and they're not private property. We now live in a world where 80% of the seeds are in the hands of only 5 big multinationals, and 20% of the seeds are owned by communities. We need to safeguard that 20%, because if they no longer exist, then farming will disappear. Farming as we know it will disappear. Something else will emerge, but it won't be farming.
Questo è un problema aperto, questo è un problema che abbiamo tutti, indipendentemente dagli OGM. Questo è un problema di proprietà delle sementi, che è un'altra cosa.
This is an open problem which is not only related to GMOs, it's a matter of seeds, of property on seeds.
Allora io voglio fare una domanda a voi. Quanti di voi fanno l'orto?
So here's a question I have for you. Who has a vegetable garden? Who grows food in a garden?
1, 2, fantastico.
Well, that's
Bene.
great.
Molto bene, molto bene. Allora, voi potete essere di due, le vostre pratiche è fantastica, perché realizzare un orto significa fare politica oggi.
Well, this is great because I think that having a garden today means doing politics.
Però voi potete essere di due famiglie.
But you can belong to one of two families.
La prima famiglia che compra le sementi industriali, quelle che si comprano nelle bustine.
The first family buys the seeds, the industrial seeds, the ones that you buy in little pouches.
Anche buone pratiche, non siete, no, tutto in regola.
Not criticizing, it's fine, but I'm just saying it's...
Voi piantate i pomodori, vengono fuori bellissimi pomodori. Se volete fare quello che per 12.000 anni ha fatto l'agricoltura, di prendere i semi di quei pomodori per riseminarli, voi provate a farlo e otterrete solo erba, solo fogliame.
So if you do that, you buy the pouch, you plant your tomatoes, you grow wonderful tomatoes, try and do what farmers have done for 12,000 years. Try and pick the seeds inside the tomatoes and plant them. You won't end up with anything, only grass will grow, but certainly not a tomato plant.
E sarete costretti ad andare a ricomperare i semi.
So you will be forced to go out again and purchase your seeds once more.
Se invece voi utilizzate quel 20% dei semi autoctoni tradizionali, non ancora proprietà privata, voi potrete fare quello che facevano i vostri nonni, i vostri bisnonni.
Now, if on the other hand you use that 20% seeds, the indigenous local seeds owned by farmers, which are not private, which are not private property, and you try and do the same, you will grow another plant. You will do exactly what your grandparents did.
Io non voglio dare una risposta, però ho l'impressione che da una parte si è più liberi e dall'altra si è più condizionati.
So I'm not going to give an answer, but I have the impression that in the one case you're more free, in the other case you're certainly more conditioned.
E sia chiaro che io ho grande fiducia nella scienza, ma la scienza non può essere al servizio di pochi, deve essere al servizio di tutti.
And mind you, I have huge trust, I have great trust in science, but science cannot be at the service of just a few, it has to be at the service of everyone.
And I think this is actually a great statement. Science has to be... we are running a little bit late already, and I wouldn't like to deprive you of coffee and networking. So food needed time to be consumed, and I would like to thank the organizers for providing this platform and for providing this interesting discussions. I would like to thank to the participants for their presentations and for their contributions, and I also would like to thank the audience, and last but not least, our rapporteur, Daniele Colombo, over here, who will help me wrap up the session for tomorrow morning. Thanks a lot, and enjoy your coffee.